Hello everyone. Apologies for not putting up any proper enrichment building videos for a little while, but as you can probably see, I've been busy with building a lot of other stuff, so haven't really had time to be making videos. But today I'm going to be showing you how to make a lovely little rope ladder. I'm going to be making one of this size again, but it can be expanded and built up so that you can make a rope ladder of any sort of thickness, any sort of size rope, any sort of length, provided that you have the materials. It doesn't really matter. All that matters is the basic principles of making a rope ladder. And we're going to be making this, I say for nothing, it's not for nothing because I bought the rope, but I always have rope on hand, so to me it's not such a big deal. Most places you will have some form of rope. And for making the wood, we're going to be using some old curtain poles which I tore down from my house because I wanted new ones because these were disgusting, and we're just going to use them to make the rungs. So first thing you want to do is you want to work out the size of the ladder that you want to make. So I'm going to repeat this basically, and these rungs are 200mm long, and I have put the holes for the rope to run through 20mm in. So I found that makes quite a nice pleasing sized rope for rope ladder for a lot of different animals. So we're going to work out how many rungs we can get out of this, and then we'll start prepping it to make our ladder. So this curtain pole is, if I can get a hook on it, 1800mm long, so 1.8 meters, 71 inches if you're American. And as I said, we're going to make 200mm long bars. So logically you'd think we can make 9 bars out of this. However, what you're not accounting for is the width of the saw blade, which is going to be cutting these up. And as a result, you'd wind up with one that was a little bit shorter than all the rest, and I just cannot deal with that. It would frustrate me far too much. So we're going to make an 8-rung ladder, which is still a fairly decent sized ladder, and will suit our purposes rather nicely. But first, this has this horrible varnish on it, and this one doesn't, but the other one that I made with had like bits of paint on it and things like that. It's got this grubby dark stain on, which I don't want. So all we're going to do is we're going to get some sandpaper, some 120 grit sandpaper, and we're going to sand this down back to the bare wood. We can then treat it later if you're using it for something that isn't chewy, like callitrichids and things like that, rodents. I would put an untreated piece of timber in rather than putting any kind of varnishing or anything on that, because you don't want them eating that varnish. But for other stuff you might want to put a varnish on, but what you don't want is you don't want a varnish that you don't know what it is on there. So we're going to get rid of all that. So first things first is I'm going to clamp it in my vise. Okay, and then all we're going to do is sand it down, and then we're going to rotate it a bit, keep on sanding. And I'm not going to record all of this because it goes on basically exactly the same for the full length of the pole. Okay, so I am now very dusty and it is half an hour later, but the pole is now completely sanded. Now, the next thing to do, obviously, is we're going to have to cut it into equal lengths. You can do this by measuring and chopping with a handsaw. I'm going to use the chop saw just because it's faster and it means that I can get repeatable cuts, which I know are going to be exactly the same. Because the length, I want it to be 200mm, but it doesn't really matter. What matters most is that they're all even. That's the most important thing. So we're going to go over to the chop saw and I'll show you what I've done to get it all set up for repeatable cuts. Okay, so we're at the chop saw bench now, and what I've done is I've just put a scrap block and I've clamped it down 200 mils away from the saw blade. And that way, as we're cutting, all we have to do is line the bar up straight against the fence, butt it up against the stop block, and we know that that is going to be 200 mil each cut. And even if it wasn't going to be 200 mil, which it is because I've just checked, we know that it's always going to be the exact same distance. Okay, so without further ado, I will find myself some PPE, because you always need to be wearing PPE when using power tools, certainly power saws. So I'm going to be wearing eyes and ears. I don't agree with people wearing gloves, because with a big rotary tool, what you don't want is you don't want a bit of material which could suck your hand into said rotation. So eyes, ears, and let's get cracking. Okay, so we've done our chops on the chop saw, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 equal sized pieces, and one bit which is just a little bit smaller. And if you look, you will see that they are perfectly square. Now, what we're going to do next is I'm just going to round off these edges a little bit. Now you can do that with a piece of sandpaper, and you just do that. Or you can do it with a belt sander or a bench sander. But the reason I didn't use a power sander before is one, because not everyone has access to a power sander, but pretty much everyone can get a hold of 120 grit sandpaper. It's not that expensive and it doesn't take up a lot of space. But also, what you don't want to do when you are sanding these down is you don't want to distort the shape of them. All we're doing is we're removing a little bit of material, whereas with a power sander it's very easy to suddenly remove like a ton of material, and then you've got ugly non-matching rungs. So I'm just going to give these a little going over, not to do anything massive, just to take off the sharp edge, which isn't very sharp, but what it really means is that if you have a machined right hand edge on a bit of wood, it's more likely to chip and distort, whereas if you have a rounded or a beveled edge, it is actually stronger. I don't know how that works. It'll be something to do with physics, but I left school at 16, so what do I know, hey? So we're just taking off the pointiest edges of the wood. Okay, so that's a scrap, we don't want that. So all of our pieces are now same length, and they're all beveled to a greater or less degree. And now we're going to make the marks for drilling the holes for the rope. So as I said earlier, we're going to make these 20 mil, and there are a few different ways you can use it. You can use this, which I call a set square. It's probably got a fancier name because there are lots of types of set square, but you could use this to find 20 mil and just mark it on. You could just use a ruler or a tape measure to do the same, or you could use an angle guide. No, sorry, not an angle guide. Why am I calling it an angle guide? This is I've quite forgotten the name. But basically, it's a little blade on a bearing, and you get it to the right length, and then you can run it along, and there you can get yourselves your bearing. Yeah? What do we call these? They have a fancy name, but I can't remember it. And what this is doing is this is just making a little mark, a very, very light blade cut all the way around, which you can kind of buff up with a pencil if you wanted, but I'm just going to leave it as it is because that way it's not going to show on the finished product so much. Right, now that that's done, we're going to make the holes. Now, the most important thing when you're making the holes is that they both go in at the same angle on each post, right? So in order to assist myself with this, I'm going to use a drill press vise, and I'm going to use my drill press or pillar drill, depending on who you ask. Different names for different things. You do not need them. You can do it with just, you know, basic drill, but for me, I'm a stickler for accuracy, and I find it a lot easier just to do it with the drill press. So if you have a drill press, if you have one at work, get to know it, get using it, because it is a absolutely fantastic tool. So now all we're going to do is we're just going to mark that little edge that I made on the marking bevel so that we can more easily see it when we take it over to the drill press. Okay, so we're at the drill press now, and I've put a 10mm drill bit in because we use an 8mm rope, so you want to use a 10mm drill bit so that you've got enough space on either side to actually push the rope through. We're going to make sure we get our PPE on again, as always, and all we're going to do is we're going to line up the drill bit, punch a hole through it, and then we're going to spin the vise around and do the other side. Helps if I turn the pillar drill on. All that hard work of sanding gone in an instant. Line it up again. Okay. Now, you'll probably see we've got a bit of tear out, but again, we'll just go back to the sandpaper and just whisk those away. Unfortunately, it's part and parcel of drilling. Unless you are really careful, you'll always get a little bit of tear out. But that's nothing that we can't solve. Okay, so all of our rungs are now drilled through. You can see on one side where it initially came through, it's not too bad really, there's not much tear out. But then on the other side, where the drill bit basically blows out the back, you will get a lot more tear out. It's worse on some than on the others. Unfortunately, that is just part and parcel of an unsupported workpiece when you're drilling through it. That's just what happens. There are ways to mitigate it, but because we're going to sand it down and the actual edge is going to be covered by a knot, we're not super worried about it. And all we're going to do, we're going to get our sandpaper again, our trusty 120 grit sandpaper. We're going to make sure that any loose bits that might come off and splinter are already off, and then we're just going to give it a quick going over just to get the worst of it off. And straight away, it's not perfect, but as I said, because we're going to be covering the edges of the actual hole itself with a knot, it's not the end of the world. So let's go and do the others. Okay, so they're now all same level. They've all got holes drilled in at equal points. and we're ready to start threading them together. So we're going to have to measure out some rope is the next part of the job. I'm going to find my rope. So these are 30mm wide. The gaps are going to be 100mm, I think. Let's have a little look-see on this one. Yeah, 100mm. So, if that's 30mm times 8, and then 100mm times 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, times 7, plus the amount that we're going to have at either end for attachments. So 100mm times 7 is 700mm. My maths is really bad, so I will have to keep writing stuff down. And then 30mm times 8 is 160. I'm going to Google it because I'm really lazy. Okay, so 30mm times 8 is 240. I totally did that in my head. No calculators on my phone were used at all, and I'm frankly shocked that any of you would even suggest such a thing. Next step is we're just going to see the knot that we're going to do. We're going to see how much line that takes. So if we say that gets to there, I'm just going to make a little mark with a pen and then take it apart again. And that is an extra 180mm. So seeing as we're doing 2 of those on every single one, that's 180mm times 16, which is gonna be it wants my phone unlocked so that I can totally not cheat. So what was that, 180 times 16? Yeah. $2,880. So that is the amount of rope theoretically that we're going to need, not including, I would say, since we're going to put an eye splice on the end. So if we consider that an eye splice, so I'd say that's a goodly length. And I'll just get a tape measure. So that will be 1,320. And we'll add, I would say, at least a metre, if not 2 metres on, for safety's sake. So, oh, it's so sawdusty in here that I won't recognise my thumbprint. So, we're going to need 2,880. Ooh, not 28. 2,880 plus 700. Plus 240 plus, how much did we say? 1,322. So we're going to need to double that. So that's 1,320. 1,320 plus 1,320. So it says here we're going to need 6 metres. That seems excessive, but it's better to go by the list because you can always cut rope back if you've used too much, but it's difficult to make rope longer. It is possible to do. You can do things like long splices, but they're a bit technical, and for a job like this, I can't see the point in it. Okay, so I've used a little over 7 meters of line, just because I'd rather have too much than not enough. I had to put in a long splice with my last ladder, and it really frustrates me and will mean that I'll just be really angry about it, and also it's not so good to display to you guys. So what we're going to do is we're going to work out roughly where we want to start our rope ladder. So we're going to leave a section of line for the attachment point. So we're going to need to leave space for an eye splice, and then however long the next length you want it to be. So I'm happy for it to start here. And to just make sure that it does start there, I'm going to put a little mark with a Sharpie on. Now, the way to do it is you get your finger, you go once around your finger, then back once again, and then you go through the middle. It's not so easy to do when it's so long as this, but it will get easier. So make sure you're holding that line in position. Okay. And we're just going to tension it down so that it hits that point there. So this is a double overhand, and what that is, I'll just see if I can zoom in a little bit. Ta-da! Is it going to focus? Double overhand, and this is the basic knot which then gets developed into things like the barrel knot, which you see in a lot of zoos. People like it to make kind of big lumpy stoppers at the end of ropes, or just lumps in the middle of ropes and things like that. It's also used to make what's known as a fisherman's bend, which is quite a good way of joining two ropes together. If you want to if you want to tie them together and you're not fussed about them coming undone later. So, double overhand. In a minute, I'll do that again a bit slower. Right. So what we're going to do is we're going to find our end again, our working end, our standing end, whatever you want to call it, bitter end, and we're going to run it through our first run. Put it all the way, getting planing shavings all over the place, and now we're going to do it again. I'll zoom in a little bit so that you guys can see hopefully a bit better this time. So, once, then back on itself twice, and then you hold it in place, find the other end, which is easier said than done sometimes. And you run the end out through. Okay, so that's just got a little kink in it, but once we pull it through it should be fine. So that's your fisherman's bend. It's just loose at the moment, which is how we want it. We want it loose because what we're going to do is we're going to pull it down, and we're going to wrap it out nice and tight around Sorry, I find it very difficult sometimes to see what the camera is actually picking up. Okay, so as you can see now, there's no wiggle in that. And that's what we want. So now, we're going to need to measure 100mm up. Now we can do it like this. We can just measure it along and make a little mark. But that's a little bit awkward. So what I've done instead is I've cut a little piece of scrap, which I've cut to 100mm. As you can see by the fact that it says 100mm on it. Ta-da! I don't know if it can focus on that. But this is 100mm. So I can then mark it up. And that's where we're going to make our next overhand. As I believe I said before, the most important thing when you are making a net or making a ladder, they both have rather similar skills and they're both rather tedious. The most important thing is that everything is equal. That you get your measurements spot on, because it doesn't take a lot to be out on a net or on a ladder, and it just looks gipping. So we're just going to work that nice and tight. As you can see, my little mark with my Sharpie there is at the base of the knot. And now we're going to get the end and we're going to pull our next one through. So you can kind of see, if I zoom it out a little bit so you can actually see, you can kind of see how it's going to go. And we're just going to tie another knot here, and then we're going to mark 10mm up again, and we're going to keep on going. And I'll do that in time lapse because it's just going to be more of the same stuff now. So you probably don't want to sit for like an hour or whatever it is watching that. Okay. Okay, I'm just going to stop it there for a minute because you'll be able to see that this one is not going the same way. And all that's done there is I've just put one too many turns on it. So that's technically then a treble overhand knot, which is perfectly fine. You can make it out of treble overhand knots, but if you've been doing doubles all the way along, a treble is no good because it's going to be uneven, it's going to mess up our maths, and it's going to piss me off. So we're going to have to go back and we're going to have to do that one again. Okay, so now that is one side of our lovely, I keep wanting to say net, but it's not a net, is it? It's a ladder. It's one side of the ladder done. And all we're going to do is going to do the exact same thing on the other side. Now, I said I measured 7.5 meters, which is about a meter longer than we worked it out. And if you look at it, I was actually pretty bloody spot on with my initial estimation, which makes me very happy. But what we're going to do is we're going to do 7.5 meters again, because as I said earlier, and I've said it a few times, I'll probably say it again in this video, it's not about making them to a specific length or a specific level. What's important is that you make them match. It's all maths making ladders, It's just making sure that everything is equal and even and set out level. And then you get a beautiful, beautiful ladder. Because if you don't, then you just end up with a subpar one, which is a little bit wonky and doesn't really kind of sit right. And you want something to be proud of, don't you? You want to have a nice enrichment home. After all the work that you put in, you want things to look pretty bloody spanking by the end of it. So just take your time with the measurements. The measurements are the most important thing in this, and the thing that will take the most time, really. At least they do for me, but again, I'm not the smartest man in the world. So I'm going to measure out another length of line, and let's get the other side done, eh? Okay, so I've cut my next piece, and all we're going to do to get ourselves started is to find out where our starting point is. See what I did there? So we're just going to measure up to make sure that the starting length is going to be the same as the other one. And then, just like before, cheeky little double overhand, just to get it started. Okay, so it's our double overhand at the same length, and now we can get started making our ladder look a bit more like a bloody ladder. If it can try and not get caught up in my vice for 2 bloody seconds. Boom. First rung, done. Smashed it. On to the next one. Okay. It is done. Well, more or less. The moment of the truth is now we're just going to have to spread it out and see whether... That looks pretty bloody good to me. I'm happy with that. So, what happens next is we splice in the eye splices that are going in either end, and put on some hardware to fix it to stuff. You don't have to put an eye splice on if you're not comfortable splicing. You can tie it up. You can tie a little bowl in at either end and slap a carabiner onto those. It doesn't really matter. I just prefer an eye splice because it looks neater, it's more hard wearing, and it's a better loop, a better way of joining something in general anyway. And if you can splice, I would always say splice. So I will get these spliced up, and we're done. And it's finally finished. So here we have a lovely little rope ladder. Perfect size for small primates, for coatis, raccoons, that sort of thing. And all I've done for the ends is a pair of little eye splices and then some carabiners on the end as well, so that you can hang it however you like. So yeah, that's it. Very simple, really. Once you get the measure out right in your head, all it is eye splices and double overhands, and you could do regular overhands, which are easy peasy. Child does them, and there's no real technicality to it. They look intimidating to make, but they are actually dead easy. So I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you like and subscribe, and I will be back sooner rather than later, hopefully, with another enrichment tutorial for you all. Thank you very much.